Hey, old-timer. This area is off-limits. Are you lost? The voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of the advanced training facility. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, dripping with the casual arrogance of youth and rank. The old man didn't flinch. He stood before the brand-new Aegis combat system simulator, a multi-million-dollar marvel of modern naval warfare. His back was to the young officer, but there was nothing frail about his posture. He was dressed in simple civilian clothes, a worn corduroy jacket, gray trousers, and comfortable shoes. He looked like someone's grandfather who had wandered away from a base tour. "Sir, did you hear me?" Lieutenant Peterson stepped closer, his own reflection gleaming in the polished floor. His uniform was immaculate, the creases sharp enough to cut glass. He was flanked by two other instructors and a gaggle of fresh-faced ensigns, all of whom were watching the interaction with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The old man finally turned, and for a moment, Peterson felt a strange jolt. It was the eyes. They were pale blue, framed by a web of wrinkles, but they were as clear and steady as a calm sea at dawn. They held no fear, no confusion, no deference. They simply observed. "I heard you, son." The old man's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, like stones shifting on a deep ocean floor. He turned his attention back to the simulator console, his gnarled hand hovering just over the surface, not quite touching it. "It's different now." Peterson's patience, a notoriously thin commodity, snapped. "It's not different, it's restricted. This is a secure training environment for active-duty personnel, not a museum for retirees." He gestured dismissively. "Now, I need you to come with me. We'll find your tour group." One of the other instructors, a chief petty officer, chuckled. "Easy, LT. Maybe he just wants to relive the glory days. Bet you were a cook back in the day, huh, Pops?" A few of the younger ensigns tittered nervously. One of them, a sharp young woman named Ensign Davis, felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. There was something about the old man's stillness, his absolute lack of reaction to their condescension, that felt less like weakness and more like immense, restrained power. She watched his hand, the fingers slightly curled, the knuckles swollen with age. It was a hand that had seen a lifetime of work, but it rested in the air with the steadiness of a surgeon. The old man's gaze remained on the holographic display, a complex map of shipping lanes and potential threats. "I was never a cook," he said, his voice still quiet, yet it carried across the room. "All right, enough games," Peterson said, his tone hardening. He was used to trainees snapping to attention. This civilian's placid refusal to be intimidated was a direct challenge to his authority in front of his students. "I'm not asking you again. Who are you, and what are you doing here?" The old man slowly lowered his hand and faced them fully. "My name is Samuel Sterling. I was invited." Peterson scoffed. "Invited? By who? The janitorial staff? There are no visitors scheduled for the simulator wing today. I checked the logs myself." He puffed out his chest slightly. "Look, I don't know what branch you served in, or if you served at all, but here, in my training space, you are out of line. We have rules." To prove his point, he pointed to a small, framed display on the wall. It held a collection of commemorative medals and a small plaque. "You see that? That's for the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Real history, real heroes. This place is for training the next generation of them, not for old-timers to get underfoot." Samuel's eyes drifted to the display. A flicker of something unreadable passed through them. "Leyte Gulf," he murmured, almost to himself. "I remember the sky being on fire for 3 straight days." The comment hung in the air, so specific and visceral that the nervous laughter died in the ensigns' throats. Peterson, however, was doubling down. He saw it as a pathetic attempt to claim unearned glory. "Oh, you remember it, do you? From the History Channel," he mocked. "All right, Grandpa, let's play along. Since you're such a military man, you must have had a rank. Let's hear it. What did you make it to? Seaman second class? Petty officer if you were really squared away." The other instructors joined in the fun, their grins wide and cruel. "Come on, tell us, Pops. We're all sailors here. Were you a deck scraper? A paint chipper?" The questions were a barrage of casual disrespect. Ensign Davis felt her cheeks burn with secondhand shame. She wanted to say something, to tell them to stop, but she was the lowest-ranking officer in the room. Speaking out against a lieutenant would be career suicide. The old man, Samuel, simply stood there, absorbing the taunts like a sea wall absorbs the crashing waves, his expression unchanging. His silence only seemed to egg Peterson on. The lieutenant stepped right up to him, his face inches from Samuel's. "I asked you a question. What was your rank? Or can't you remember that far back?" Samuel Sterling held Lieutenant Peterson's gaze. The young officer's eyes were full of fire and pride. Samuel had seen eyes like that before, on 1,000 young faces, full of certainty right before the world showed them how uncertain everything truly was. He drew a slow, steady breath. The air in the climate-controlled room was sterile, but for a split second, he could smell salt and diesel and something else. The metallic tang of fear. The touch of Peterson's hand on his arm, meant to be a gesture of patronizing guidance, was the trigger. It wasn't rough, but it was firm, demanding. And in that instant, the polished floor of the simulator room dissolved. The low hum of computers became the scream of a typhoon. The year is 1950. The deck of the USS Juneau is a bucking, slick monster under his feet. He's not an old man in a corduroy jacket. He's a 28-year-old commander, and he's the acting captain because the real one is laid up with a burst appendix. Rain and seawater are coming down in sheets, so thick he can't tell one from the other. The wind howls like a banshee, threatening to tear the communications array right off the superstructure. Below him, in the dark, churning waters of the Korea Strait, is the rest of the fleet. His fleet. "Sir, the destroyers are reporting they can't hold formation. The waves are 25 feet and building," a young communications officer screams over the gale. On the radar, a series of phantoms. Unidentified contacts, moving too fast, too erratically. They could be North Korean patrol boats using the storm as cover, or they could be ghost signals, figments of the storm's electronic rage. The rules of engagement are clear: do not fire unless fired upon. But if they are patrol boats, and they get in among the carriers, the entire landing at Incheon, scheduled in less than 48 hours, would be in jeopardy. Millions of lives, the fate of a nation, rested on his next command. "They're trying to draw us out, sir." To break radio silence, his XO yells, holding onto a bulkhead for dear life. He feels the weight of it all. The lives of the 1,200 men on his ship. The tens of thousands in the fleet. The mission. He's just a commander. He has no authority to make a decision of this magnitude. But he's the man on the spot. He closes his eyes for a single second, the cold spray on his face a brutal baptism. He sees the map not on a screen, but in his mind. He visualizes the currents, the storm's path, the enemy's likely strategy. It's a calculation of impossible variables. "Helm, bring us about 30 degrees to starboard. All engines ahead full," he says, his voice cutting through the storm's roar with an authority that surprises even himself. "Signal the fleet. Code word, Whispering Ghost. Disperse and rendezvous at Point Zulu. Maintain strict radio silence. We're going hunting alone." His XO looks at him, aghast. "Sir, that's directly against fleet orders. We'll be sailing straight into them, if they're even there." "They are there," he says, his eyes fixed on the raging darkness. "And they're expecting us to be afraid of the storm. They're wrong." The memory faded. The roar of the typhoon receded, replaced once again by the quiet hum of the simulator room. He was back, an old man in a worn jacket, with a young lieutenant's hand on his arm. His pale blue eyes, which had been seeing a dark and stormy sea, refocused on Peterson's arrogant face. The entire flashback had taken no more than 3 seconds of real time. He looked at the young men, at their clean uniforms and their easy smiles. They thought war was a video game, a series of tactical problems on a screen. They had no idea. Lieutenant Peterson, feeling the old man's unnerving stillness, gave his arm a little shake. "Earth to Grandpa. I asked you a question. Your rank." Now, Samuel Sterling's gaze did not waver. The ghost of the storm was still in his eyes. He answered the question, his voice perfectly level, without a hint of pride or anger. It was a simple statement of fact. "My rank," he said, "was Fleet Admiral." For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the whisper of the ventilation system. The instructors and ensigns stared, dumbfounded. The concept was so utterly preposterous, so far beyond the realm of possibility, that it short-circuited their brains. Then, a snort. It came from Peterson. It started as a small, incredulous puff of air and grew into a full-blown, barking laugh. Fleet Admiral? A Fleet Admiral. He slapped his thigh, turning to the other instructors. Did you hear that, Chief? We don't have a visitor. We have a comedian. The Chief Petty Officer shook his head, a wide grin on his face. A 5-star LT. This old-timer commanded the whole damn Navy, apparently. The tension in the room broke, replaced by open mockery. The ensigns, following their superior's lead, began to laugh. It was absurd. Fleet Admiral was a rank of legend, a wartime-only, 5-star position held by gods of the sea like Nimitz, Halsey, and Leahy. There hadn't been a living Fleet Admiral in decades. The last one, Nimitz, had died in 1966. This man was old, but he wasn't that old, and he certainly didn't look like a historical figure. He looked like a retired accountant. Okay, that's it. I've had enough of this, Peterson said, his laughter turning to cold anger. The joke was over. You're not just trespassing anymore. Impersonating an officer is a federal offense. And impersonating a 5-star admiral? You've really lost your mind, old man. He let go of Samuel's arm and reached for the radio on his belt. This is Lieutenant Peterson in Simulator Wing Charlie. I need base security immediately. We have a civilian here, code. Lieutenant Peterson. The voice was a thunderclap. It wasn't loud, but it carried an absolute, unquestionable authority that made every single person in the room freeze, their laughter dying in their throats. Peterson's hand stopped, hovering over his radio. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Standing there was a man who needed no introduction. He was tall, lean, with silver hair and the sharp, intelligent face of a career officer. The 2 silver stars on his collar glittered under the fluorescent lights. It was Rear Admiral Hayes, the commander of the entire naval base. His face was a thundercloud, his eyes dark with a fury that made Peterson's earlier anger look like a child's tantrum. Ensign Davis let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. After the Fleet Admiral comment, she had seen the mockery start and, on pure instinct, had slipped out of the room and made a frantic call to the base commander's aide, babbling something about a situation with a disrespectful instructor and a very old veteran. She never imagined the Admiral himself would show up. Hayes strode into the room, his polished shoes clicking an ominous rhythm on the floor. He didn't look at Peterson. He didn't look at the other instructors or the wide-eyed ensigns. His gaze was locked on the old man in the corduroy jacket. As he approached, the fury on the Admiral's face melted away, replaced by something else entirely. It was a look of profound, almost reverent, respect. He came to a halt 3 feet in front of Samuel Sterling. His back went ramrod straight. He brought his hand up in a salute so crisp, so technically perfect, it was a work of art. Sir, Admiral Hayes said, his voice now filled with a deep, sincere deference. It is an honor to have you here. I apologize for the reception. I was not aware you had arrived. The room was plunged into a silence so deep it felt like the pressure at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Lieutenant Peterson stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The other instructors looked as if they'd been turned to stone. They were watching their base commander, a 2-star admiral, salute a random old man he had just called sir. The old man, Samuel, simply returned the admiral's gaze and gave a slow, small nod. It's all right, James. I was just admiring the new equipment. James. Peterson mouthed the word, his mind reeling. Admiral Hayes held his salute for a moment longer before slowly lowering his arm. He then turned, and the full force of his previously contained fury was unleashed upon the instructors. His eyes, cold as the North Atlantic, landed on Lieutenant Peterson. Lieutenant, Hayes began, his voice dangerously quiet. Do you have any idea at all, who you have been speaking to for the last 10 minutes? Peterson was white as a sheet. Sir, he's a civilian who wandered into a restricted area. He made a preposterous claim, sir. A preposterous claim? Hayes repeated, his voice dripping with ice. Let me educate you, Lieutenant. Let me educate all of you. He swept his arm to include the entire, terrified group. This man is Samuel Sterling, and he was not lying. He is not a Fleet Admiral. He is the last Fleet Admiral of the United States Navy. A collective gasp went through the room. It was impossible. It made no sense. Sir, with all due respect, Peterson stammered, that rank hasn't been active since World War II. The historical records. The records you can access, Lieutenant. Hayes cut him off sharply. What you don't know, what almost no one knows, is that in 1951, after the success of Operation Whispering Ghost, President Truman signed a classified executive order. He awarded a field promotion to the young commander whose strategy single-handedly saved the Incheon landings and prevented a catastrophic loss of the 7th Fleet in a typhoon. That commander's unorthodox tactics were deemed so brilliant, yet so controversial, that his promotion and his very identity were sealed at the highest levels of government. His command strategies are still the foundation of our storm-weathering combat doctrine, taught right here and at Annapolis, but they are attributed to Tactical Study Group Delta in the textbooks. They were, in fact, the work of one man. Hayes took a step closer to Peterson, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. That promotion was to the 5-star rank of Fleet Admiral, to be held for life. It was a rank given not for a career of service, but for a single, history-altering act of genius and bravery. A rank this man has never once used or spoken of. He is a living, breathing piece of our nation's most secret history. He is a legend. And you? Hayes's voice rose again, crackling with command. You called him Pops. The weight of the Admiral's words fell on Peterson like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his entire worldview collapsing. He looked at the old man. The worn jacket. The simple trousers. The quiet, steady eyes. He had been standing in the presence of a giant, a figure of myth, and had treated him like a stray dog. The shame was a hot, searing wave that washed over him, so intense it made him feel dizzy. His face, which had been pale with fear, now turned a deep, burning crimson. The other instructors were staring at the floor, their faces masks of horror. The ensigns looked from the legendary old man to their humiliated instructor, a lesson in humility being burned into their minds more effectively than any textbook ever could. You wear this uniform, Admiral Hayes continued, his voice resonating with cold disappointment, and you think it gives you authority. It doesn't. It gives you responsibility. The responsibility to lead, to protect, and to respect. You look at this man's age, you look at his clothes, and you saw nothing of value. You, who are tasked with training our future leaders, failed the most fundamental test of leadership imaginable, to see the person, not the package. You judged a national treasure by its cover, and you found it wanting. Each word was a hammer blow. Peterson could feel the eyes of his students on him, not with ridicule, but with a kind of pitying horror. He had been so proud, so certain. Now he was nothing. He was less than nothing. He was a fool. He took a shaky step forward, his military bearing completely gone. He tried to raise his hand to salute the Fleet Admiral, but his arm trembled too much. He dropped it, clenching his fists at his side. His voice, when it came out, was a choked, broken whisper. Sir, Fleet Admiral Sterling. He couldn't form the words. The apology he needed to make was too big for language. There is no excuse, sir. I am so deeply sorry. Samuel Sterling watched the young man crumble. He saw not an arrogant officer, but a boy who had just been handed a lesson so harsh it could either break him or forge him into something better. There was no triumph in Samuel's eyes, no satisfaction. There was only a deep, ancient well of empathy. He stepped forward and did something that shocked everyone in the room. He gently placed his gnarled, steady hand on Lieutenant Peterson's shoulder, the same shoulder the young man had grabbed in anger just minutes before. Lieutenant, Samuel said, his voice soft but firm. Look at me. Peterson, his eyes swimming with tears of shame, forced himself to meet the Fleet Admiral's gaze. The most important lessons are the hardest, Samuel continued. Pride is a heavy anchor. It can hold you in place, or it can drag you to the bottom. It's your choice. You wear that uniform well. It's a good fit. From now on, wear it with wisdom, not just with pride. Remember what you felt today. Let it make you a better leader. A better man. He gave the shoulder a gentle squeeze. The sea doesn't care about the stars on your collar, son. It only cares about your competence, your courage, and your character. The sailors you lead won't care either, not when the storm comes. Remember that. Peterson could only nod, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Yes, sir. I will, sir. Thank you, sir. Samuel released his shoulder and turned back to the simulator, his moment of instruction complete. He pointed a finger at a small data block in the corner of the holographic display. "That's why I'm here, James," he said to Admiral Hayes, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time. "My grandson, Robert. He designed the user interface for this system. The ergonomics of the data flow. I just came to see his work." The final revelation was, in its own way, as stunning as the first. He hadn't been here to relive his own glory. He hadn't been drawn by the echoes of his past. He was just a grandfather, quietly proud of his grandson's contribution. The humility of it was staggering. Admiral Hayes managed a small smile. "He's a brilliant programmer, sir. Top of his class." He then turned to the assembled officers. "Ensigns, you are dismissed. Contemplate what you've witnessed here today. Lieutenant Peterson, you and your staff will report to my office at 1600 hours for a formal debriefing. Now clear my sight." They scrambled to obey, practically fleeing the room. Peterson, however, paused at the door. He turned back, brought his hand up in a shaky but earnest salute to Fleet Admiral Sterling, held it for a beat, and then disappeared. He was a changed man. "Well, sir," Admiral Hayes said, his tone shifting back to one of warm respect. "Since you're here, would you do me the honor of allowing me to give you a proper tour? And perhaps offer your thoughts on our new systems?" Samuel Sterling looked from the complex simulator to the Admiral's hopeful face. "I'd like that very much, James," he said. "I'd like that very much indeed." As the two admirals, one of the present, one of a secret, legendary past, walked away, talking quietly about targeting algorithms and literal combat strategy, the simulator room fell silent once more. All that remained was the low, steady hum of machinery and the lingering lesson of a giant who had walked among them, completely unseen. What we saw that day wasn't just about an arrogant lieutenant getting his comeuppance. It was a living reminder that the greatest heroes are often the quietest. They don't wear their valor like a medal, they carry it in their bones. It's a reminder that respect isn't owed to a uniform or a title, but to a life of service, a life of character. Before you judge an old man in a worn jacket, remember you have no idea what storms he has weathered, what fleets he has commanded, or what worlds he has saved. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that honor the heroes who walk among us.